A continuación, para seguir con el programa del CEO Meeting 2021, los dejo nuevamente con el presidente del Club de Innovación, Eduardo Vitrán, quien realizará una entrevista en exclusiva en torno al futuro del Corporate Venture Capital en Latinoamérica. Hoy, una de las tendencias claves en materia de innovación y colaboración, por la cual hemos decidido apostar desde el Club de Innovación. Eduardo, todo tuyo el micrófono para que puedas presentar a nuestro siguiente invitado internacional.
Muchas gracias, Camila. Vamos a partir sobre el tema de Corporate Venture a nivel global y traemos realmente una primicia, un invitado de lujo. Tenemos a David Goldschmidt, él es Managing Director de Samsung Catalyst Fund, que es el fondo de capital de riesgo corporativo que tiene Samsung a nivel global. David está madrugando en estos momentos porque está en Silicon Valley. Son las 6:26 de la madrugada ya, así que lo hicimos levantarse muy temprano. Él vive en Tel Aviv y el trabajo de este fondo y de lo que hace David está muy centrado en los ecosistemas, ¿no es cierto?, de Silicon Valley y de Israel, y nos va a traer, por lo tanto, la perspectiva internacional. Y yo voy a hacerle una entrevista. Hi, David, how are you?
Very good, very good. I think I should start with an apologies, although I think I can guess some of the things you were saying, but unfortunately my Spanish is not as good as that. So I apologize for speaking.
No. For us, really, it's a real pleasure and an honor to have you, given your global involvement in this very interesting area of corporate venture that is becoming so in fashion, you know, globally. First of all, in a more broader sense, we would like to ask you what is corporate venturing. We want to introduce you to a broader audience, and what are the most frequent modes of interaction. Corporate venture capital is one, but there are many other modes. Then why you don't start us giving us a broader view on this, David?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. It's always a pleasure to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. I've been with Samsung for 6 years in corporate venturing. By the way, we call it in short CVC, right? Just to, rather than saying corporate venturing capital every time. Before that, I spent some time in VCs, in venture capital, financial VCs. So it's interesting to have the perspective of VC versus CVC, corporates. Of course, VCs, the financial VCs, are main drivers for innovation for the startup world and so forth. And when we look at corporates, in large corporates, there's a lot of innovation, right? For example, if we look at Samsung, and you would go to visit our manufacturing facilities, right? It's almost like science fiction, right? There's a lot of innovation. At the same time, corporates cannot innovate in everything. Right, you can't. I mean, so you pick the domains that you want to focus on, and startup companies, early stage companies, they have certain advantages because, first of all, they have the agility of a very small organization, willingness to take risk, which sometimes is a bit more difficult, you know, for executives in a corporate, you know, the concern of failing. So the connecting the power, the huge power of corporates. With the agility and the risk-taking capability of startup creates really tremendous opportunities for innovating together. And of course, startups and corporates can collaborate, right? Do business agreements and things like that. But venture investment or capital equity relationship creates some different kind of bonds between the corporates and the startup. That's why CVC can be very important and add something that goes beyond just partnering or having some relationship with startup companies. As far as corporate venturing is concerned, there are many different modes, right? There are some, actually few corporates that take a pure financial view. So they say, okay, we'll take some money from our balance sheet and we operate like a VC. This is really the fewer case. On the other edge, there are corporates that really treat the startup world as almost an extension of their R&D department. We can talk a bit some more about that. So you have the full range of corporates taking different approach. Also, I would say something very important, the way we look at it. There's one approach for corporate venturing, which we call inside out, right? So you have a corporate with business operating units and, you know, they're developing fantastic technology, but they're missing few things. So they know exactly what they're missing. And they use the corporate venturing activity to go find outside what they miss. So they already know what they need. We call it inside out, right? So it's the demand is coming from the inside. The other very different approach is something we call outside in. So basically we say our business units, they know exactly what they need and what they should do. Let's look what's happening in the outside world, right? What are the trends? What are the new business creation opportunity for the organization? What's happening in different domains, and how could that become an opportunity for the corporate? So that this is more of an outside-in approach. You first look at the outside world, meet startups, venture capital funds, you know, other entities, and then you try to bring that understanding into the organization, collaborate with these companies, and so forth. So you have different dimensions, right, for corporate venturing. It can be financial, it can be purely, you know, around collaboration. It can be inside out, it can be outside in. Very exciting because there are different models, and actually all these models have a place, right? I mean, we have our own approach, but you know, all these things have good value. The last thing I would just say is that by the end of the day, you have a corporate like Samsung, which is hundreds of thousands of people. And then you have a startup, which can be like 20, 30 people or even less. So how do you mediate and do the interface? That's the role of the CVC team. It's really like impedance matching. It's really connecting to organizations that are very different so that they can work together.
Yeah, David, on this different approach, inside, out, and in, one tend to think that corporate venturing is trying to look new businesses to diversify the current business of the corporation. But what you are saying, at least in the case of Samsung, that really you are looking for solutions in your core activity. Is that the way is developing globally, or is more in the marginal areas or new areas for diversification of the corporation?
I think it's everything. And by the way, every corporation has its own DNA and does something else. I mean, even looking at Samsung, it's all of the above, all of what you've said. I mean, it could be one of our product units that is missing a very important sensor or a connectivity technology and would like to collaborate with an outside company. Or it could be that Samsung is looking at what could be new domains, right? Where Samsung could be active, right? Traditionally, we didn't have automotive activity. Should we go into automotive? How should we do it, right? So that's where CVC activity can be very important for basically creating new business for the organization. And many corporates do that, right? And some corporates focus on one end. Some of them do the full spectrum. It's really a function of you know, the leadership, vision, and decision and guidance of the organization.
Yeah, and CVC, you believe is having a real, very important role in promoting innovation in the corporate sector, or still is a marginal component of innovation, since in open innovation especially? What is your view? Is it having a very deep and profound impact, or is this just starting globally?
Right.
Innovation.
That's a great question. I mean, I can share perspective of, let's say, 20 years in venture, right? Almost 15 in financial VC and then 6 in corporate VC. So in the very distant past, corporate venturing was not a significant play. Actually, I would say after the dot-com bubble blast in 2001, actually corporates were the first to slow down, right? This is very different today. So today, probably anywhere between 20 to 30% of capital going into venture capital, right, is coming from corporates. Corporates are highly active. Traditionally, corporates would come into investments only in very late stage of startup companies today, corporates. We've been sometimes the first money into a company, right? So very, very early stage. We collaborate with an entity called, with a body called Global Corporate Venturing that are really trying to monitor, track, help educate, CVCs. And they also collect data points. So if it's okay with you, I would love to share some data points because, we usually talk about corporate venturing, mostly in Silicon Valley, also in Israel, by the way. But there's also activity in Latin America. So if it's okay, if I can share my...
Yeah, of course. We'll be delighted if you could bring figures that will give us a perspective on the evolution of corporate venture capital. Yeah. Right. Somebody should allow you to share.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet. The organizers should help us. Camila, why David not able to present their screen?
Lo están viendo en este momento, Eduardo. Ya va.
Yo no lo estoy viendo. I am not.
No. Ellos lo están viendo. Como estamos completamente en vivo, estamos trabajando para poder tener la presentación. Un segundito.
Okay. Then I will have to guess what is there.
Okay. You cannot see it. Okay.
Don't worry.
I can just verbalize it. Okay.
No. Go ahead. Everybody can see it. Myself. I am.
Okay.
Don't go.
So,
ahead. Go ahead. I have them. Okay. Now it is. Okay.
Sure. No problem. So, first of all, the US is usually like a good benchmark because it's probably the largest, right, venture capital market. The numbers in the US are just huge, right? This year, numbers are doubling over last year. We see here numbers that just to give the sense that corporate ventures are, money coming from corporate venture, represents rounds that are like 50% of, things that are happening in the US, give or take, right? If we switch over to Latin America, we can see that the number are somewhat smaller, but, there's definitely a very good trend, right? The numbers are growing over the past several years. Besides just the growth, we can also see, and that's something we can discuss a bit later, is that big part of the activity is going into fintech, into consumer devices, consumer, domains of investments. If we go to the next slide, we can see that naturally, I think Brazil and Mexico represent, probably the largest areas of activities for corporate venturing. What is interesting, by the way, we go to the last slide here that I wanted to share, is that actually activity of local corporate venture arms is not that huge, right? So it's like a bit more than 10, 15%. It's sub 1 billion year to date, which again is not a huge number. It's a great number, right? Because it shows we see the growth, right? So as long as numbers are growing, it's a good sign. But the activity of local corporates, according to the data coming from GCF that graciously shared with us, the numbers are still relatively small compared to other geographies, and there's definitely good room for growth, which is always good to have opportunities for doing more.
Yeah, very nice information. First of all, Chile is number 4, according with your figures in Latin America. And given our relative size, we are small, not bad for Chile. Second, we see from the Latin American numbers that this is exponential growth, but also it's a very new phenomenon. It's very new. It's last 3-4 years where this is growing. And you show also is that the global corporations are the more active in Latin America. They are really much more active than the local or the Latin-based corporations. A question that we have, Latin America is becoming a complex region with social unrest, with complexities, with a lot of uncertainty. In a way, COVID-19 have been very, very complicated in many respects for this area of the world. Why do you believe is this exponential growth of global corporations involved in corporate venture capital and CVC? Given the numbers, 6 billion is a significant money. And we would say, well, you will escape from a region that have this uncertainty, political uncertainty, and still they're coming. Why?
Right. That's a great question. I think, if we can go back to, I would say, end of February 2020, right? We were saying, okay, the big crisis is coming, right? Everything will stop. Corporate venturing and venturing in general, will slow down dramatically. We've been through the cycle in 2001, the cycle through 2008, 2009. We were sure it's coming. What happened actually is that we discovered, the process of digital transformation. We discovered that things that, previously took like 10 years, suddenly happened within a few months, right? So COVID-19 with all the challenges and problems and everything, and each country faced it a bit differently, right? I mean, Israel has its own way to do it and other countries different ways to do it. But what was very clear and adamant is that, this is created tremendous acceleration of digital transformation, right? Across the board on many things, right? I can specifically for Israel, many governmental services that you still had to go and be in person, everything, everything had to transition to be online. So actually, and this applies lots of things. It applies governmental services. It applies to, commerce, right? Pushing e-commerce. It applies to banking. I can speak for Israel and Europe. Many banks had to shut down their branches, right? So what do, right? People had no choice but to switch to the smartphone. The smartphone became your bank, became your shopping center, became, of course, the Samsung smartphone, but there are also others. But
yeah,
became really the driver for many things, and this gave a tremendous push to many new services that came out, right? For digital banking and acceleration of services that are remote, online, digital identity, being able to identify yourself remotely, and things like that. So actually, while in February and beginning of March, we were saying, okay, it's going to be a very slow year. Actually, 2020 and 2021 became like a boom because there's so much innovation around these things. And it really touches upon everything. It starts from semiconductor production up to the highest level of services, right? So across the board on system and networks and everything. So there's a lot of innovation that is needed. People stayed home and consumed more Netflix hours. So Netflix needed more servers, right? And more compute and more connectivity and things like that. So across the board, all these verticals needed more and more and more. And there was need for innovation. So that gave a push to everything. And this applies both to the actual technology development, but also to the launch of services, companies that are offering services. And Latin America, it's like there's a huge population, right? So it creates a tremendous opportunity. And that drives, the need for capital, and it attracts investors and things like that. So we think that was actually it was a bit even surprising, right? How 2020 evolved, right? When I remember April and May was we were telling our portfolio, prepare for doomsday. Everything's going to be bad, no capital and so forth. And actually everything completely changed around. And corporates understand that. So this has also given a tremendous push to corporate venturing activity.
Yeah. Even when we compare, Latin America, when you are figures with the US, the growth here is more exponential in Latin America, in corporate, in CVC, which
right.
is interesting. What happened in Latin America also is that the mobile connectivity is quite high compared with the level of income. And as you said, the mobile is the new sensor of IoT for all kind of business on the consumer side. One question that I have is these global corporations, when they look at a region like Latin America in CVC, are they looking at market expansion or just trying to find, as you do in your business, for new innovative concepts? What do you think? It's more just an expansion, a market expansion from Europe, US, Israel to this new area, or is really looking for innovative developments?
Actually, it's both, right? So it's really a function of the fund, right? So, I mean, you have funds like, we're for example, we're a deep tech fund, right? So we really, use the investment lens, to look at technology. So that's one approach. You have funds that are more focused on market development. And actually, we've also done investments that relate to market development. So it's really all of the above, right? You have areas, I'll give you an example. Israel, there's a lot of core technology that is being developed, but the market itself is not, it's a small country eventually.
Very small, yeah.
We make a lot of noise perhaps in the news, but we're a small country, so we're not a large market. If you look at Latin America, you have cores of technology development, so that's very interesting. Then you also have, it's a huge geography, a very large population, so that's definitely interesting as a market. So I think these two things both of them are relevant. I would just add one comment is that, by the end of the day, innovation is global and has no boundaries, but investment, that's a very local business actually, because people like to invest with people they know, they trust. And it's very important to have like local ecosystems for this, right? So you need to have a local ecosystem of entrepreneurs and startup companies. That's very important. You need to have a local ecosystem of venture capital fund, just having availability of capital. In some countries, there's also governmental systems to support, like in Israel. This entire ecosystem is very important to kick off things, right? Before all corporates come and everything, and before startups can, start multiplying in numbers and everything. That's very, very important. This ecosystem is, of course, mostly developed in Silicon Valley, some other places around the world, Israel, booming in Berlin, in Germany, and, many other places. But that's very important, right? And that's part of it. So it's, you have innovation, you have academia with bright ideas, you have large markets and so forth, but the ecosystem is very important. Because by the end of the day, many of these things are locally done. And for a corporate coming from outside of Latin America, we need to have partners, people we can go invest with. If there's a board, we need to know that there are local board members that can be there, things like that. So ecosystem is very, very important.
Yeah. David, especially in V2B, the relationships are very, very important. And I imagine that many of the corporate venture capital goes into the B2B business. And then you need to have local connections. And in fact, there are many startups that develop in Latin America in B2B, try to get market penetration and then to sell themselves to global B2Bs. And that will be a kind of a market expansion. On what you are saying, David, on local ecosystem, I just want to tell you a story that you will be close to it. In Israel, you developed the YOSMA program when you had the migration from Russia, many scientists. I went there in 1895 and I learned about the YOSMA program with the chief scientist. I was in Corfu at the time. And we decided to copy the YOSMA program. And in 1987, we launched it in Chile through Corfu. And it's still going on. There was a professor from Hebrew University that was our advisor, Maurice Teuval, a guy, a researcher that had studied venture capital a lot. And he talked about coordination failures. And in a way, you have in Israel a mature system with the startups growing and you bring venture capital. We did it the other way. We brought venture capital without startups growing. It took 10 years, 15 years, because had to go together. Yes, you bring me to my mind this experience that we learned from Israel and it still have a lot of impact in terms of developing of the local venture capital system. That's very, very important. the challenges that you see for the development of corporate venture capital, thinking globally, but also thinking in Latin America? What are the main challenges that you see? How we get, a higher involvement of local corporations? You show the figures where the local corporations are not so great in terms of corporate venture capital. We have a concept, Steve Blank talked about the theater of innovation, and referring to companies that really do PR and they create things, contests, but it's not really into the business of innovation. We believe that we have many cases where this is more of a PR thing. Then we have to take this very seriously, because, as you said, could have a huge impact in innovation in the corporate sector. Then what will be, in your view, the main challenges to develop this in this region?
Yeah. I think, first of all, first thing first, it's important to have the ecosystem, as we just discussed. But secondly, it's really a matter of there has to be senior leadership buying into this, right? Corporate venturing is not like developing a product, selling, measuring exactly how many sales you had, things like that. It's a long-term play. You need to have commitment of the organization to do it, and you also need to do it right? It's, the relationship with startup companies is a very sensitive and, can be complicated thing, right? It's very important to try and develop this without strings attached, right? So sometimes corporates, in their first steps into this, they look at startup companies as if it's an extension of their R&D department, right? Yeah. We don't think it's the right way to go, right? I mean, if you have these strings attached, the startup is totally tied to your organization. It will be, it will not be able to really grow and flourish, raise additional capital. Eventually, it will really become your R&D department, right? So the way we look at it, also when we do investments and when we engage with startups, we really want to make sure, first of all, that the company can be very successful for itself, has all the ingredients, the right team, solving a big problem, addressing, a very sizable market, and that they can be successful by themselves, right? And then we try to see how, we call it 1 + 1 can be equal 3, right? How can we do together greater things? But we always try to take care also of the interests of the company, not just how it will help our corporation. That's very important. Also, by the way, that's why we also have sometimes, we've had some pretty good exits, right? Because we just try, not always we're successful, but we try to invest in high quality companies, and these are companies that can be very successful. Then I think, it's, again, as I said earlier, there has to be buy-in, and corporations need to have team members that have the venture experience, right? It's really an art to do venture. It's not, it's something else. It's different engineering and many other very innovative things that companies are doing. By the way, one of the strategies that corporates can start with is actually to initially just engage with VCs instead of investing directly. Yeah. So it's like a first phase, we call it fund of fund, right? We, instead of investing directly into startup companies, you pick some very good venture capital funds in the geography, whatever, your own country or in Latin America, or generally speaking, you invest into these funds, and together you start working and, gaining the learnings of how to do it. And of course, the role of the CVC, I can't undermine it more. I mean, it's like matching between the huge corporation and the very small company. That's a difficult task, right? It's a very important task. And the other thing that's very important to understand is that corporate venturing, that's a long-term play. When you invest into a company, it's long-term, right? I like to say it's like wedding. It's even more than marriage, right? Because when you get married, I mean, God forbid, you can divorce. When you invest into a company, it's very complicated to separate, especially from the company side. It's very difficult you can't just throw away your investors, right? So you really you need to have the mindset that this is a long-term play. Things may take time, but the reward can be very significant, right? And you need to have the buy-in of the leadership of the corporation, and also have the right team, people with venture experience. And then you can definitely capitalize that and bring value. And, you know, we always try to do 1 + 1 = 3, right? We serve Samsung and we try to help the startup company. So we think that you need to have that kind of approach to do it. We always collaborate with other investors, you know, other VCs, you know, other CVCs. We think it's very important for the company. So just having the approach that the startup companies are not your R&D department, no strings attached. They need to be independent, be very successful, and collaborate with syndicate partners to succeed. And if they are successful, the likelihood of having very successful collaboration will be much higher.
Yeah. This is a key point, David, because many people believe that this could hamper the growth of the startup. There are many questions from the public, but there are some managers that have to convince their board, and they ask, what are the key KPIs that they should bring in order to convince the board of the corporation into getting to CVC?
That's an excellent question. Actually, you know, with GCV, the organization that I mentioned, that we've been discussing it, right? I mean, how can we create some sort of a benchmark so that also, you know, when you go to your management or to your board, you can say, I mean, that's my target, right? I mean, by the end of the day, what do we want to accomplish? We want to bring innovation into the organization. We want to help our business units, you know, to develop into new domains. So one way to measure that is the level of collaboration, you know, and value that you're able to extract for your operating units. Sometimes the value is basically helping the organization take a different direction. Sometimes the value is generating additional revenues, right? It's not the same. It's not every case is the same. So I think my suggestion, right, it's very important to you know, to calibrate the expectation ahead of time, right? And it takes time to build the credibility in the market, build the portfolio and all that. So, you know, perhaps the earlier years, it's more about learning, right? And then later on, you can start measuring, you know, I have X amount of collaboration, doing this, doing that, and things like that. You can definitely measure, and you need to measure and have KPIs, but you also need to know that it takes time. And it's very important to match expectation. You know, things are not going to happen in like 6 months, right? It takes time.
Longer horizon. David, the time runs out. I have many other questions. This is a so interesting subject for corporations in Chile, for innovation in Latin America in general. I really appreciate your effort to wake up at 6:30 to be with us from Silicon Valley. We expected to have you from Tel Aviv, but you have to travel. Well, you are a very dynamic man that work all over the world, and thank you very much. We really appreciate your insight into this area, which is growing exponentially in Latin America, and Chile is one of the places where this is happening. Thank you very much again, David.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Muchas gracias, Eduardo. Thank you very much, Didi, for this interesting presentation about corporate venture capital, CVC, one of the keys to collaborating and innovating in current times.